Welcome, everyone, to Journeys of Faith. And our guest today is Matt Curtis. Matt is a parishioner here at Ave Maria Parish. He's married and has 3 children. And that's just a brief bio, but let's begin your story, Matt, with your childhood, your early years, which I know were tough and a challenge for you. But can you tell us about your early years and also the role that faith may have played in your childhood?
Sure, yeah. So it's much easier to talk about given where I am, and it all ended great. So there's a lot of truly amazing blessings that happened, even though I had to see those things in hindsight. But the other part is it's much easier to talk about because they don't define who I am. They helped harden a lot of my faith and my soul. Now as as I moved into adulthood. But just to try to keep it as high level, I was one of 4. Both my parents suffered from addiction. They they got divorced when I was pretty young. My father, amazingly enough, became sober. He didn't become sober from not being a great person, but he followed a life of sobriety, which was incredibly helpful to me as I got older in life. But growing up was very difficult. We didn't have much. There were many days of not having hot water or much food. It was a pretty hectic and chaotic upbringing. DSS, or Department of Child Services, had been involved many times. I bounced back and forth between my mother and my father, trying to establish who wanted me and my brother and my sisters. And then by about the age when I was going into the 7th, 8th grade, finally my father had stepped up and had a stable enough home, and the responsibilities fell upon him, and I lived with him through high school. And then when I was 16, unfortunately, he had terminal cancer, passed away. Our relationship was pretty chaotic, to say the least, but at that time, at least, I had some semblance of a home, and was in high school and doing the right thing and on that way. And then obviously wasn't able or could move back with my mother, so I moved in with my sister, which was truly the the turning point, but a very important part of my life. She's kind of she's been an anchor for me, a lighthouse, a shepherd for me. But I lived with her, and past my father passing away, and I played sports, and I excelled at that, and I had a great outlet in athletics and academics, and I was very fortunate enough to be accepted to Harvard. I went and played football there for 4 years. I was the captain of the football team. Because of a couple of stories of me telling in the Boston Globe and local newspapers, I told this story, and it was a very difficult thing. It's kind of unwrapping that, but it actually connected me with people that I work with now. And after graduating from Harvard, I caught on with a group, a hedge fund or finance, and have been able to build a career. And I currently work with them. And then subsequently, I hope when my wife watches this, she knows that she was incredibly important, even though she's coming last. Throughout high school, I found the woman in my dreams, the love of my life. Georgia. Yeah. She's just an amazing person. She challenges me to be better. She brings out the best in who I am. So we dated all through high school. We dated in college. We got married at the very tender age of 22. Not too long after, we had 3 beautiful children. Live in Linfield, have a fantastic life. And it was very difficult upbringing, but it really gives me such an amazing perspective and gratitude for where I am. And so that's kind of it. That's where I am.
Matt, so you grew up in Lynn.
Yep.
In what you describe as a chaotic, kind of family situation there. Both of your parents suffer from addiction. You struggled, your family did, to put food on the table. The Salvation Army, I guess played a role in supporting your family. So from that environment, you've already talked about excelling in sports. You were an all-star at Lynn English, playing football there, and then of course a storied career at Harvard. I just, in that kind of, well, it's sort of like a rags to riches story, when you think about it. What sustained you, particularly in the area of faith? I think you did tell me at one point your dad did have a role in modeling faith for you. Can you talk about faith and that whole transition from your upbringing to adulthood?
Yeah. So when I was, when you're in survival mode and when you're young, I would say that faith wasn't the first thing on my mind, or Jesus. I actually felt almost the opposite. I had a very difficult time because I couldn't understand why these things happened to me. It wasn't until I mentioned my sister. She was the one who really introduced faith to me and introduced a spiritual side and religious aspect. To be very honest with you, really, I remember when I broke my leg going into my senior year. I was living with her. I couldn't drive. My father had just passed away. Was being recruited by colleges, and I finally felt like I had an opportunity to better my life through this, and I had this unbelievably damaging blow. And as a 16-year-old who's been dealing with, things throughout my life that had been setback, or, your trials and tribulations all throughout, it finally almost felt like a death blow. I was at my lowest point in my entire life. And my sister Michelle, she handed me a Bible, and she explained to me, just talking through it. We started reading the book of Job, and she started to explain to me how hard it was, and how all these things happened to Job, but he had amazing faith, and it wasn't that he wasn't mad. He was incredibly mad and angry and sad. And through that, I don't know if I would say it just kind of clicked, and that I had nowhere else to turn other than believing that God was there for me. And subsequently to that, I healed my leg. I got into Harvard. I became a much better football player. And from that point on, I obviously have issues and problems, but my life has been nothing other than just unbelievable sense. And it's not until now that I have a much deeper sense of faith, and have been on a much more refined process of trying to deepen my faith, that I can look back at the years when I was young, that I felt like I had no one, and God put a man named Tony Benham who picked me up every day and brought me to Little League. And I think about the teachers that I've had that supported me, and even though I didn't feel at the time, I can go and I can look back and I see all of the positive things that I was able to have. Even though my father, who passed away early, and we weren't able to mend many of the relationships we had. I'm able to look back that he brought me to church. He was a man of faith. He did get sober. And to live an entire life where everybody around you isn't sober, and to be able to lean into a religion and become and have sobriety, having to be able to see that and recall those instances and whatnot, it really gave me an entire kind of full circle, view of God has been with me the entire way, and I'm so thankful for that, and I'm so appreciative and grateful to have found and been able to have a deeper sense of religion now and faith now, and to be able to understand how lucky I was then, even though it was hard to see at the time.
Matt, going back to something I read about you, one of those articles in the Globe, you talked about having a grateful urgency to succeed, that you approach every day with a grateful urgency. You were determined not to fail. Given, again, your background, and you wind up at Harvard with, in your words, some of the smartest people in the world, both, faculty, student body, and everything. But that drive, that determination to succeed and everything, have you thought about that as, God working in your life, Matt?
It's unbelievably so. And at the time, when I said that, or in the way I felt, and I didn't really have much of an alternative to not succeed. I didn't have parents to support me if I fell back. Now, I had an unbelievable family of brother and sisters, but they also had their own families, and I always, the analogy was as if my feet were at the back, right behind me was a cliff, and I couldn't take steps back. I had to keep moving forward, and a lot of the faith and belief of my family was incredible. They were just there every step of the way, supporting me, doing everything they could to help me, and that what you were explaining now is just an unbelievable element of faith that I have, and I don't know if it was at that moment that faith was the one that was pushing me to succeed as much as it was, again, in hindsight, now as I look at things, it really feels like a miracle that I was able to do it. And when I think about faith, and I think about the element of having that spiritual component of what you're doing and pushing you, as I've gotten older, I lean so much more into my faith, success or failure almost, and knowing I'm gonna be okay. And at the time, I didn't feel like I was gonna ever be okay, and I think that's actually what I needed at that moment in time. Was I needed that element of I would say fear, but it wasn't that. It was an innate urgency to better my life, and so I like that.
And Matt, you used, the experience of Job earlier.
Yeah.
And when I think about Job, he went through all of those calamities, all that suffering, which affected every aspect of his life, including children and property and livestock and wealth and everything else. But at the end of that encounter with God, he almost had this greater respect and reverence for God. He didn't get answers to all the questions of why those bad things happened, but he walked away from that encounter thinking, God has still sustained me, and I may not understand all of this, but I'm never going to understand the mind and the heart of God completely, but I want to live as a man of God.
Yeah, I guess the point, like, that I identified a lot with Job is that your spirituality and your faith, and one of the things I love about our religion and the teachings from Jesus is it's not linear and it's not consistent, right? Like it's like that's the beauty of it. It's like the sermon on Ash Wednesday it was very much like we make mistakes and we have problems and we ask for forgiveness and we are hand in hand with God when we're at our lowest and we're at our highest. And I am so thankful, and it sounds, when I say like I didn't have, I had these things pushing me, and they weren't always done out of love. A lot of times they were done out of spite of trying to, better my life, because I didn't feel loved. And now it takes, I can look back and say that's what I needed. Like I needed those things in my life to be able to be here, to be a better father, to understand what not to do. And God put obstacles or things to help refine who I am. And that's what I really am grateful for is now that I'm on the other side, and I'm still not on the other side. I'm still going through, I still have issues and problems. But the faith, now that I've been able, now that I am older and have children, and I'm so thankful for our faith in the religion and the religious teachings because I have such a better appreciation of an ability to understand, that God is always with you, regardless if it's good or bad, if it rains or there's sun or and that is where I've tried to lean more in, and I've got so much more comfort and help. And
That's great. Matt, faith is a dynamic gift. In fact, it can grow and blossom, or it can wither and fade. So I'm really interested, and you and I have spoken a little bit about this before, but what helps your faith grow? What do you do to nourish and feed your faith?
So I think one is obviously praying. The other is going to mass on Sunday. I love going with my kids. I love when they ask questions like that. Really, it brings so much of my life and everything that I want to be as a believer in Christ and just a religious person. And then talking about it, talking about certain I love hearing things from the Bible, readings from the Bible, or people who can help me use faith as a tool to work through things, and hearing other people tell me about a certain part of the Bible or a certain story they have that got them through it. It helps. It helps humanize or make me. It makes the problems that I feel that everyone else has, and then it helps harden because the Bible has an amazing ability of in almost every problem you've ever had. There's a great story or and there's a men's prayer group that where we basically we say the rosary once a month or every couple of weeks, and it hardens my soul in a really good way to help in any problem I have, and so that's where I get the most enjoyment out of. When I go for runs, I listen to the rosary now. I do the Bible in a year, and it's hearing these stories and being able to help other people like my family or my friends, and then having them help me is truly something that has sharpened and helped me tremendously.
Matt, you're a husband and father, and I have seen you in the pews many times with your girls, your three beautiful girls, and you're finding the right page in the missalette, and you're answering their questions and everything. What do you want to do as a dad? You and Georgia, obviously,
Yeah.
have had your children baptized. Anastasia just received First Holy Communion.
Yeah.
What do you want to do to kind of pass on that faith for your children?
Obviously going to church and becoming a part of a community that supports and loves you regardless. It's funny, church is an incredibly important part of the faith, and when you're 6, 7, 8 years old, it's very hard to comprehend and understand a lot of the things. So I try to, so I'm if anybody's at church, I'm usually the one that, like, I might be the biggest kid out of my wife has 4 kids, so it's like, so we're usually the ones laughing or trying to explain to them in very basic terms of what's kind of happening, but letting them know that there's that their mother and father will always be here for them, and we're kind of I don't want to say the first line of defense for them, but that there's just an amazing amount of comfort and strength, more importantly, they can find in the faith that I want them to, I almost want them naturally to have it through osmosis. I mean, I remember going to church with my father, and I don't know if anybody was ever a kid, and they knock the thing where you kneel down and it makes the loud sound, and I think yeah. And everybody gets the mean look from their parents when they're a kid, and so I want them to have. I pray that they can develop that faith on their terms, and I want them to. Have the sense of comfort that I have, and doing that through a way where it's not not forced, but just through the understanding and me telling them how much, I think the thing that they actually don't mind going to church. They actually enjoy it, and I think part of it's because of how much I like it, and I love it so much, and I try to tell them, like, I need this. I love it, and there are many times I sit and I'll be crying in mass, and my wife laughs because I cry more than her. I cry when I'm happy. I cry when I'm sad. But they get it, and I think through the relationship I have, or me and my wife have with the church, I think they're picking up the pieces, which is all I can hope for. And as they get older, we'll obviously work more into different aspects of it, but it's the most comforting and unbelievable thing to know that regardless of what happens to you or what you do, that somebody loves you and is here for you, and that's what I hope.
There's no more important responsibility than raising your children, providing for them, their education, their whatever the needs are, and especially faith, which is what you promised, you and Georgia. Remember baptizing one of your children, and you promised to bring them up to keep God's commandments as Christ taught us. I think parents just have this essential role in passing on the faith and being the best role model, that they can be. So, but I really love the way you interact with your children. I think it's just great. Matt, looking at your life, this is the final question.
Sure.
Looking, the overview of your life, the transition, from early years to young adulthood to your vocation now, marriage and being a father. What have you learned that you could pass on to our viewers here about faith, about how God works in our lives? I think you probably have learned quite a bit, from your experience. So, what would you say to our viewers?
Yeah, I think sometimes we get mistaken by um, an inability to have, Jesus is the Son of God. He's perfect. And, I a couple of my favorite stories in all of the Bible is when Mary and Joseph, they actually lose Jesus on the way back to, and I sit there and I think it was on one of the sermons, they said, like, we all want to be good parents, and like Mary and Joseph are the greatest parents ever. They lost their son for 3 days, and so
so it isn't too bad.
Yeah.
Loser.
and the other is when before Jesus is crucified, he's incredibly scared. He has a lot of anxiety and fear, and and his completion of becoming human. It's such an important thing it's an important part of how I've come closer to religion and faith, because I get mad and I make mistakes, and even though I went to Harvard and I have a fantastic life, and it's still very hard at times, very difficult, and like I was saying, faith in your ability to come closer to Jesus and religion and having that unadulterated, like, I believe it's just not linear, and I think that there are going to be setbacks. There are going to be times that someone passes away, or you lose a job, or you have some difficulty, and at that time it may not feel like God is with you. And what I've experienced is that He's always with you. He gives you exactly what you need. I was like, when I broke my leg, I was at the lowest point. My sister said, God will, sometimes you have to lie beside still waters, and you have to take a break, and you have to accept what's happening. And I didn't want to hear that. Nobody ever wants to hear that, but that is what I needed. And if I didn't have that, I wouldn't be here. And so it's knowing that you're not perfect, that Jesus was perfect, but He gives us examples of understanding how hard it is to be, man or woman, and that faith in being a part of that, even when it's difficult, is just such an unbelievable bedrock for moving forward in your life in a very positive way. So that's what I would say. It's just that, like, trust me, every life is not easy. It's never easy for anybody, but it's significantly better and much more, easier to comprehend when you can have something to fall back on, like your faith.
And obviously, grace, God's help, God's presence really sustained you, Matt, throughout your life.
Yeah.
Maybe you don't always recognize it
Yeah.
in the moment when it's happening, when bad things are happening especially. But as you look back in your life, I think you're so right. Sometimes it's in retrospect, that we really, put the pieces together and say, oh, that was God, sustaining me.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
Matt, thank you very much for joining us today, and please watch for the next episode of Journeys of Faith.